Hi, I want to make a quick distinction video. I always say quick, but it ends up being long. But I want to go over this, and it's between this equilibrium idea, this concept of equilibrium, obviously an interaction based on a concept that we have, an interaction creating a concept that means anything, and this idea of fairness and what the fairness game is, because obviously from our point of view, the equilibrium idea that people may bring up, an idea that something in the end, because something happens a certain way, there's an equilibrium. When you apply that to fairness in the game that we're playing in sentient life, I've mentioned this before, the sentient life, the experience that we're having, the sentient being controlled by these crude mechanisms, applying something about fairness or something about the sentient being experiencing something and applying some kind of equilibrium, how everything is justified and that no one should pay for their crimes, that something's going to happen obviously, but the self mechanism that's pushing forward is obviously something completely disconnected from equilibrium. It's completely vague and completely unusable concept that you're trying to use and applying it to life and how things are going to happen a certain way. Things are deterministic. That's the way it's happening. Things are happening a certain way and that's the way they're going to happen. And regardless of that, doesn't mean there's an equilibrium. And especially when you're applying that to sentient beings, when you're thinking about our sentient welfare, we're not thinking about some kind of equilibrium in life. We're thinking some kind of fairness in life and trying to make things better for everyone, or at least for ourselves, in consideration of speaking for, I can almost say almost all people, but ourselves and our others, we're considering something, some kind of well-being, because if we're not, we're existing in an experience, and that's exactly what we're trying to do, is maintain some kind of welfare, and that's exactly what we're doing by existing. We're reinforcing that by just continuing to exist. So we have some kind of concern. When we're not feeling good, we obviously want to feel good, so we don't want to be in any kind of pain. And that's obviously goes to another subject about threshold and things like that. And the threshold thing is, I think I might want to mention that in another video, but threshold doesn't matter what causes the pain. A person getting a splinter in their finger can be just as painful as someone, getting their arm chopped off. It's not about what it is that causes the pain. It's the fact that there's pain and no pain, and less pain or more pain. You have more pain, you have less pain. And if a person shows signs of more pain by having a splinter in their foot, in their toe, then a person that gets their arm cut off, then it doesn't matter that the person went through more trauma, more meat and more flesh was lost. The person, same thing emotionally, a person crying because their plant died, as opposed to a person that had someone that they loved personally died. If a person cries more when the plant dies, they're going through more emotional pain. If they're reacting more, if they're showing more despondency or more pain and more suffering, then the other person's suffering more. It doesn't matter what causes that. But I might want to mention that in another video, go on the subject like that. But the idea of equilibrium, we're not thinking about some kind of equilibrium. We're thinking about the welfare of certain beings and applying some kind of equilibrium to the idea of existing. And the sentient experience doesn't mean it. You can apply some kind of equilibrium, how things work a certain way, but obviously fairness can be applied the same way, because a person can have far more and we can have far less. But you could say, well, people that are more rich, they have more, the unfairness, the lack of equilibrium, the proof of some kind of lack of equilibrium, but not applying it to the same subject. But unfairness, the thing that means something is fairness to the sentient being, sort of like applying determinism to the idea of things moving forward. And the idea of applying fairness to things moving forward, and our experience and understanding how things are being, these interactions that we're experiencing. Because the interactions are something that we can understand, and cause and effect we can understand. We can understand determinism is something in the past, but we could understand cause and effect and how that has an effect, and how these interactions have an effect. We can understand there's going to be an interaction that has an effect, but understanding almost a disconnect between determinism and these interactions that we have. And these interactions that we have are obviously something that's going to happen based on previous interactions, and there's something that's happening right now, and that by that logic we can understand interactions happening based on previous events, and how it's going to move forward. And we know that forward, once something's happened that happens in the past, we can understand that. And there's a sort of a disconnect between linking those two subjects. Sort of like applying fairness and equilibrium, and someone that's rich and compensates or has something less than someone else. But generally speaking, there's people that are more satisfied and less satisfied in their life. There's either more satisfied, less satisfied, more pain, less pain, and there's people in more pain than others. Obviously, a person can be more empathetic. The more empathetic you are, the more likely you're going to feel pain. The less fair it is, but also it's the more fair for everyone else if you're more empathetic, because that empathy can help someone. So you have to take the fall for helping other people. Generally speaking, helping everyone else but not helping yourself. You hear about helping others and put yourself behind that and help others and not yourself. And if everyone applied that, obviously it would be good, but it would almost be a detriment to ourselves if we had to have some kind of empathy, because we'd have to be recognizing all this different pain, and it almost makes you come to the painful conclusion that there's only so much you can do about this game that we're playing. And when you come to recognize there's only so much you do, forget yourself, help others, don't be selfish, make sure that you look outward instead of inward, and that's always something you can use. But if everyone were doing that, obviously everyone would have some kind of detriment, at least in recognizing the futility and the imposition of life if you were so empathetic in recognizing other people's pain. Because if you did that, everyone would be in some kind of pain in recognizing. But I think also in a way it'd make sure at least a predisposition to recognizing pain can help lead to a conclusion where it can make sure there's not as much pain in the end, and it can help the game in the end. Because once it's already happened, the pain, the suffering, it can't be undone, and there's only mitigating against future pain that you can experience. And that's what we're trying to do. Is once it's happened, you can't do anything about it. But once before it happens, and that's what you're doing. It's learning your lesson beforehand. Make sure you don't have to learn a lesson. But if you have to learn a lesson, learn it sooner so you can mitigate against more in the future. And that's exactly the best idea. If you have to learn a lesson, learn it early, at least into a particular circumstance, so that you have to learn it later on when all sorts of other bad things would have happened, things that you didn't know about, circumstances you didn't know about. It's about learning lessons sooner than later so they can use those to prevent more harm in the future. So, yeah, so when you're trying to describe some kind of fairness in the ascending experience, this idea of equilibrium doesn't matter, because we're talking about the ascending experience, and because we're here and we're trying to make ourselves feel better and say others feel better, and that's what matters in the end, at least to the sentient being, because that's what our world revolves around, is making ourselves feel satisfied. That's why we exist, because our world revolves around that. So many of our personal biases, our personal feelings, our psychological needs, our physical needs get in the way of our philosophy, and sometimes we don't even recognize it. Sort of like projection onto other people. You feel like your opinion can be projected onto other people's opinion, or sometimes it's the reverse. You feel like your opinion's really unique, and it's not necessarily unique as unique as you think. But many times people like to think that their standard is something like, that's what you believe, right? And people think, and I use examples like that in these videos, like people think, and that's almost in a way projection to use an example in these videos. But I think it's a good example to at least use generally in describing the circumstance in which people are at least understanding things, at least on a visceral or on a general level, like trying to find at least as generalized examples as possible in describing these situations where you can just change one variable, and it can be the exact same thing that you're talking about. So that's the thing I'm trying to describe in here, where you can just change one variable and it can be the exact same thing you can apply to your situation, at least not using any kind of word manipulation in describing situations. So yes, equilibrium can't be applied because we're not concerned about some kind of equilibrium. We're concerned about our well-being, and equilibrium can't be applied to well-being when at least it has something to do with the well-being being under the control of the forces, the crude forces. So equilibrium can only be applied to, say, compensation, a compensation effect that something has, like you lack sight, so you make up for it in hearing. Or since the traffic here is going slow, people are going to move into the other lane, and it's going to be faster. But then the people that are in that means there's going to be more people in this lane, and it's obviously going to move slower because there's more people. And then that traffic builds up, and they go into the other lane. It's a mechanism where things are obviously interacting, and things happen a certain way, and they work on a certain level, and they're going to interact a certain way. And that's just the mechanism at work. It's either this or that, and it's usually when it's over here, then it's not likely going to be over here, and so on and so forth. Things are just changing positions, and it usually levels out, because if you're over here, and you want to move faster, then you're going to move over here. But then again, there's going to be more people over here, therefore you're going to probably move slower because more people are going here, because one person on this side's going slow, and so on and so forth. That kind of thing where you're describing situations where things are balancing themselves out because something happens here, something's going to happen differently over here. Or something like that, describing it. That wasn't the best description. But I guess it'll do fine for right now. So we're describing fairness and things like that, and describing these things. And when it comes to sentient welfare, which is the thing that we have, the thing that we're looking through, the thing that we're concerned with, at least in ourselves or in others as well, that's the thing that matters the most. And applying equilibrium to an idea of fairness or the sentient well-being can't be applied to some kind of equilibrium that we're experiencing in the life game. So that's applying two completely unrelated ideas. I guess you can apply it to a certain extent when it comes to the circumstances, but the circumstances with the idea of not taking responsibility being a piece in this mechanism moving forward, and fairness, it can't be applied in the same way when it comes to things that can take control, that are sentient and do things and have interactions with other things that are sentient as well. And when you're interacting and having these interactions, things are obviously going to happen a certain way, and you can apply that to that situation. But things are going to happen a certain way, and that's to a certain extent is in our control because we're in the mechanism itself. So the mechanism, the equilibrium mechanism, is the thing that you could somewhat apply to the circumstances when you think about these kinds of things to a deterministic universe, and applying that things are going to happen a certain way. And if there's more over here, there's likely to be less over here, or there's likely to be the same on both sides. And then if it's going to balance itself out in some way or whatever, so about thinking some kind of self-balancing mechanism that doesn't apply, but that something is going to happen a certain way, and it's going to do certain things like that. The thing is that's controlling the mechanism. Things are going to happen a certain way. That controls the circumstances of our existence, but our existence means something because of our psychology or neurology that's experiencing some kind of force feedback with the mechanism. And this force feedback means something, and this force feedback is not based on equilibrium. It's based on, obviously, I touch something and it touches me back, equal and opposite reaction, but that doesn't mean equilibrium in the existence, and based on the idea of fairness and the existence of our well-being, because our well-being is obviously different. Applying equilibrium to that, other than the fact that some circumstances happen, consequences happen, certain things happen, certain reactions happen, we apply laws based on our own ideas of fairness. Fairness and equilibrium is another key distinction to make when describing certain situations, because our fairness is completely different on the idea of sentience and experience, and then the idea of some kind of equilibrium you apply to some kind of thing that happens in the past, and how things usually level themselves out and using those circumstances, such as equal and opposite reaction. There's more traffic over here than so. So you have more traffic on this side, then you're going to go on this side, and there's going to be more traffic on this side, and that's going to slow you down because there's more traffic. Then you go over here, and then, but obviously, since there's less traffic on this side, people are going to get in this side more, and so on and so forth. Sort of like a leveling mechanism based on the circumstances of a sentient being, and not just a sentient being, but based on these things that are obviously happening in a certain way. But that doesn't mean they had to be this way. It just happens to be that way because we already exist. We sort of like we already exist, and we think it's so common because it's a one in one. We don't know how uncommon it is because we happen to exist in the circumstances that happen to make us exist. So it could be one in one, but it may seem like it's more than that because we're experiencing the experience, and we think it's so easy to experience these things. But it's not as easy as we think because we're experiencing them. And once we've experienced them, the circumstances have already allowed us to us. But they can have just as easily have led somewhere else, and we wouldn't have to exist. But we happen to, and that's the circumstances that do exist. And that doesn't mean it exists everywhere, or that it's extremely rare. It doesn't have any implication. But the implication is by way of there's no other proof. That's the proof you have to take, and that's the proof you have to take is more viable. And that's exactly the thing that we need to do. And that's exactly the thing that's going on. So I think that's all I want to mention. I might mention more. I don't want this video to go on for too long. So thank you, and until next time, bye.